Hey, welcome to Graphic Policy Television, GPTV. On Bread in My Hands is Button Pusher, a really fascinating graphic novel by Tyler Page. It's actually more of a graphic memoir, and it is published by First Sequent. So this is written by Tyler Page, art by Tyler Page, and about Tyler Page. The graphic novel is about Tyler's life growing up with ADHD. Now, Tyler and myself are about the same age, might be, I'd say maybe like a year older than me, roughly, right about the same age. So he grew up mostly in the 80s, primarily in the 80s was, when I think a lot of this went on, judging by the television shows and stuff like that are mentioned. So in the 1980s, like ADD, ADHD was just becoming a thing. It wasn't like a readily diagnosed thing. And so this is about Tyler growing up with that and growing up in the 80s and kind of coming into his own. The side story on that is Tyler's parents have a very unhealthy relationship, abusive relationship. As a whole, it's an abusive household. So that's kind of in the backdrop of it all. So there's these really interesting things of like, is Tyler's, what's causing Tyler's behavior? Is it actually ADHD? Is it ADD, ADHD? I think some slight differences between those, but it kind of is used at different times in the book just because it was used at different times in our lives. Or is his behavior due to his parents' relationship issues? Also hints that his father had some neurotypical problems as well, was on medication to help that. I mean, he was definitely an abusive person based off of this. And, he himself might have had like ADD, ADHD. So it's really, I think, a fascinating read to kind of see how Tyler kind of grew up with this and his dealing with it. There's also the coping of dealing with his parents' relationship that I think is really interesting. As a whole, I mean, I related to it in really interesting ways. I didn't have ADHD, I have ADD. I'm sure if the whole like neuroatypical was a thing back then, I probably would have been at some point diagnosed with something. I would not be shocked on that one. I definitely have my quirks here and there. But the thing that really hits me is towards the end of it. I think he's in high school. He's put on some weight. He's talking about the medication, not using the medication, all that. And I myself have health issues and was on medication since I was about 13. And that caused me to gain a lot of weight. And when I went to high school, I was heavy. I think I was probably like 160 pounds and barely 5 feet something. So I was a pudge ball. And was picked on a lot. So it was, I think, really interesting for me reading this and seeing a very similar experience. Like he just kind of had an urge to eat where I was having an urge to eat due to the medication that I was on. It was a known thing that would cause a lot of eating. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of that comparison. Like I got to that part and I was like, holy crap, like there's a lot here that I myself experienced. So I thought that was actually really, really interesting, coming to a similar situation from two different kind of reasons. But overall, I think it was a fascinating read. One, it explains ADHD a lot. There's a lot of good breakdowns in it. Let me see if I can find an example of it. So here's kind of where it takes a break from the narrative and actually kind of goes through some of the scientific stuff on it. So to me, that I thought was actually really cool. Here's another example of that. It was very educational. I just kind of think of it as like behavior issues, obviously from something going on with the brain. But this kind of like really lays out there as to what specifically is happening. And also that what's happening is not necessarily the same thing for everybody. So I think I understand it a bit more. And that is, it's a great thing. It's interesting that this, I think, is a borderline of it's border graphic memoir and also graphic medicine in many ways. Like it uses comic books and graphic novel to not just tell Tyler's story, but also explain this medical condition, which is straight up graphic medicine. I think it's a really interesting area of comics that comics have gone into and the way that comics are being used. And I love seeing more of that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So for me, like Button Pushers, I think is a really solid graphic novel for those who themselves are ADHD and want to learn more, or maybe parents or relatives or someone else who wants to learn more about ADHD as well. Like I actually think it really does a really solid job of laying out the behavior, at least Tyler's behavior, and what's happening in his brain, the medication, all that stuff. I think it does a solid job of that. So overall, like I liked it. I think it's entertaining, it's educational, and for me who does not have ADHD, as far as I know, I don't have relatives that have it. Like basically I've not been around it, so it's not something I've dealt with or experienced. It's educational. It was very educational for me. So solid stuff. I really like it. Art, I think is good. Like it's a good style. I don't know quite how to describe it. It's kind of like a cartoony factor to it. But I like it. I think it works well for the narrative and that. And I really like the explanations of the medical aspects of it and how that's all done. I think that's laid out really well and explains everything really well. There's also some interesting stuff in the back. Some of Tyler's like early sketches when he was a kid, a little bit kind of like writing about himself and kind of writing about the graphic novel and doing the graphic novel. Some like, I don't know what we call it, like layout, prelims, whatever you want to call it, process work for the graphic novel itself. So overall, I think it's really solid. This is a great read. Very cool, great use of the medium. Highly recommend it. I think this is solid stuff. You can go get this now. It's in bookstores and comic shops. We've got a link beneath this video where you can put in your zip code and find a comic shop near you. No shop, no problem. We do have some links where you can purchase your own. There'll be affiliate links, so we do get a small percentage, and by doing that, it'll support our site. So thank you. And speaking of support, I want to thank First Second for hooking us up with the review copy, and of course, thank you all for watching. If you are into comics, if you're into graphic novels, check us out every single day at graphicpolicy.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, all at Graphic Policy, keeping it nice and consistent. So until next time, keep reading those comics, and keep it geeky. Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.